All right, welcome back, everyone. This week we're going to be looking at a number of issues in qualitative research. One of the ones specifically is going to be design. So it's kind of I'd say a lengthy PowerPoint presentation. So let's just jump right in. So here are the different design topics that we're going to be looking at. The first one is going to be the qualitative research process and how that process entails, how it looks. We're going to be looking at the research questions and how they might differ a bit from quantitative, entering the field of study and how that looks, sampling methods, which are going to be different than quantitative, and then an overview of designing a study and what kinds of actual designs are out there. So let's just jump right into the research process. Excuse me. So whereas, quantitative research, it's typically a linear process, and we've talked about this already in this semester that we develop some kind of a theory or have a theory that we want to test out. We create a hypothesis about that theory and how it's supposed to run, and how it's what results that we're gonna get at the end of the study. We sample participants, we collect data, and then we interpret it, and then determine whether the hypothesis is fail to reject or to reject the hypothesis. Qualitative research is not that linear. It's very what's the word for it? It's very circular and very unpredictable at times. So here's actually a circular model for qualitative research in terms of how this might look. It's not linear, in terms of one thing then another. We might start this process with some preliminary assumptions about whatever whatever object of study you're looking at. And then we might go in and we might sample some participants, collect data, interpret the data. Based on those interpretations, we might sample some more participants, collect and interpret more data, maybe compare the interpretations, and then go out and sample some more people and collect and interpret data and compare all of the interpretations at this point. And it might go around and around like this several times before, on the other end, theory begins to develop from all of those samplings, data collections, and interpretations. And you might go around the circle 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 10 times, until something emerges. Remember, this is inductive reasoning. This is collecting data and building something from the data, which would be theory. And then, of course, in quantitative research, you would take that theory over here and you would test the theory out to see if it can be substantiated. So in a sense, this is like, this slide is probably one of the most descriptive aspects of research methodology, as in terms of how qualitative research will create something and quantitative will determine if it's valid. So, oops. Okay, so let's move on to with the process. Of course, I think we've gone over quite a bit of this already. Qualitative research, we don't apply a theory to a subject under study. That the theory comes from the study. We don't come in with a theory. Random sampling is something that we don't engage in. That we sample people purposefully. And this is not deduction. This is induction. That we build things up. We build theory in qualitative research. We don't test theory, and we don't reduce it down into its constituent parts using deduction. Principle of openness. This is something where I think, in general, I think researchers. I think in quantitative research we need to do this as well. But researchers, especially in qualitative research, have to suspend their thoughts about how things are going to turn out in the study in terms of what the results are going to look like. So and that's just something to go on. And you have to keep your blinders off as researchers. You just have to go in with, wide-eyed and be open to pretty much whatever's going to, come out of the study. And note that this theory applies to counseling too, that a lot of times counselors, clinicians, they will go into a session with somebody looking for something very specific, and you look hard enough, you're going to find it, but it might not be the issue in which people are coming in for. So researchers and clinicians need to remember to go into this to the research process and also the clinical process very open-minded, very wide-eyed, and just to see what is in fact in front of us. And here's a quote by Freud, basically saying to remain open-minded about things and not have specific expectations for how things are going to go. Because really, if you do that, you're just gonna find what you want to find anyway. So, okay. Theories, like I said, theories don't point to facts. They're not right. They're not wrong. They're just perspectives. And really, a study should be able to improve and build upon a theory, or maybe substantiate that the theory isn't really isn't all that valid. Okay, so let's move on to the question. And this is the essential, like I said before, I think the research question in a qualitative study can be just as telling and just as important with qualitative research as it is quantitative. And this is what drives and guides the study. Now, here's the difference in quantitative. So you've developed quantitative research. That's the question, and you don't change it. But in request at time at the as research study is commencing, and that's okay, because that's what qualitative research is. It's that circular formation where you sample, you collect data, you interpret data, you come up with, based on those interpretations. Those interpretations will guide where your study goes, and it's also going to guide what your research question will look like. So very important. Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing to look at on the slide is that that openness, remaining open to the new and surprising results as your study unfolds and as the process ensues. That qualitative research really is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to find, and you have to be flexible enough as a researcher to go with the results. And really, I would say that qualitative research is like once again, it's just like therapy. You never know what you're going to get when you walk into these rooms. So as long as you're open-minded enough to follow where the data takes you, or follow where the client takes you. Different types of research questions in terms of whether they're state questions or even process questions. State questions might describe how a certain state has come about. In terms of, for example, the current state of nursing care facilities for older adults, regarding quality and services. So, that might just be telling a story in terms of, this happened, and then this other thing happened, and this financial decision was made, and then the board was reorganized, and then new state types of legislature came in, and this is how we came to the place that we came to. So it's I would say it's somewhat factual in terms of, A, B, and C happened, therefore we got D. Process is a little different. This describes how something develops or changes in terms of causes, processes, consequences, and strategies. So how are these services received, and how is the quality assured provided on a daily basis? So it's kind of like maybe a response to the state question that, the current state of nursing care facilities for older adults, is such and such, but how are they being received by the patients, and how are the nurses responding to maintaining quality assurance, on the ground level. So it's a little bit of like this is what happened and this is how we're responding to what happened, kind of thing. Questions can attempt to confirm or also discover something. Confirmation questions, you know, they might attempt to confirm existing assumptions that you know, that people kind of know about, but they just haven't confirmed as of yet, I guess. And then the discovery attempts to discover something completely new. Now, when you create a research question, you can combine all the questions together in terms of having, you know, maybe a state question, maybe you know, combined with a discovery or confirmation question, or a process question confirmed or combined with a confirmation and discovery question. So, and the more that you can combine these questions, you know, together, to it's gonna make the it's gonna give the question texture and make it more complex. Okay, so let's move into entering the field and what that means. When I refer to the field, you know, the field is a general term. It can really be anything. It can be maybe an institution like ULM, or it could be a subculture like you know, some kind of underground music you know, venue of some kind, or you know, possibly a family, or you know, a group of people that, you know, might have some kind of you know, a common belief. A business like, you know, McDonald's or whatever. Could be anything really. So the researcher really needs to define what field they're entering into. And gaining access to the field is going to be that's going to be something that's more important in qualitative research than quantitative, because quantitative, like, you know, if you're gonna pass out surveys, you know, in different places, you know, yeah, you do need to get permission to enter into a place that might be, you know, a business or whatever, and you know, pass out surveys, but that's very much on the surface level. Where qualitative research, the nature of qualitative research is so incredibly intimate that, you know, you need to get into that, you know, into the field, but you know, the amount of time and energy spent in the field is going to be a lot more involved. So, you know, and some of the things that you need to, yeah, actually, all of these things, like, you know, that you're going to be more involved in the field, disclosure with the field would be greater, and then also the length of time. Whereas in a quantitative study, going and passing out surveys or putting surveys in a lunchroom saying, anyone who qualifies for this, please take it, is different from spending a month or two in a work setting where you are interviewing people and observing people. You know, that can be very lengthy and intimate. So like I said before, in terms of you know, the researcher's role, the researcher, and in addition, the participants are the main instruments in collecting the data. And you know, as you enter into a field, you're not going to have a neutral role. You will not be this like outside entity who's coming in, who's going to be unaffected. You will be very affected. You will be influenced. The researcher, you know, is going to have their biases. And as part of the process, the qualitative researcher must negotiate what role they're going to have in the field. Are they going to play an active role? Are they going to participate in whatever events and, that are happening in the field? You know, are they going to be more on the sidelines and less active and maybe just watching? You know, will they become a member of the group, or you know, is it overt or covert in terms of the role that they're going to play in the field? So there's a lot of things that that the researcher has to consider, and in what it really depends on what kind of data that they want to collect. So, you know, and that's all going to come out, like, you know, as they set up the study and as they think about, you know, the data. It's like, okay, well, if I want this kind of data, I'm going to have to play this other kind of role in the field in order to attain the data. And I know I'm speaking in vague descriptions, but you know, the thing is that I could use countless types of there's countless examples. So as long as you know that I guess what kind of data a researcher wants to pull from the field will determine the role that they're going to play in the field. So, like I said, institutions need to be identified, or I guess the field needs to be identified that there's going to be access requested on many levels. The first one is at the academic level. It's always going to be the IRB that you start with, and the IRB will determine whether your study is going to be harmful, and if it is somewhat harmful, what degree is it, and do the results justify the means? And then you go to the institution. So if you wanted to enter into, let's say, some kind of a big conglomerate kind of business or institution or university, you actually, you have to go through the administration. You might have to maybe enter in at their IRB if they have one, or go straight to the administration route in terms of, the vice president, or whoever might be that contact person, possibly HR. But you have to be granted access by the institution itself, and then you actually have to go to the individuals. And and at any level that there's a breakdown in any of these levels, then your research is halted. Also, when you enter institutions or fields, that you are creating some kind of an effect, that your presence will change things. And that's just the way it is. I mean, you might disrupt day-to-day types of processes that go on. You could get in the way. It could be unsettling to the institution. It could be, in general, it could be unsettling to the employees or the participants that you're intending on collecting data from. Also, depending on what kind of questions you're asking, you might be promoting the fact that these, or promoting that the participants air some of the dirty laundry of the institution. Also, the purpose of the research may also be unclear to the institution themselves. Like, well, we don't really know what you're doing, and and we need, and they might not. They might need to be educated on it several times, especially if your study changes. Also, data protection, confidentiality, and anonymity. That if you're interviewing people from a specific institution that are in a specific, let's say, sector of the institution, how are you going to keep those participants anonymous in what they talk about? Also, the research really can't offer anything directly to the institution, so there's really no benefit to the institution itself, no direct benefit. So, a lot of businesses are going to say, well, what's in it for us? And the researcher is going to say, well, I don't know, you're just doing something nice for me, or I'll be able to get a PhD and you can feel good about that. So, they really have no reason to let you in because it's not benefiting them. However, there's really no reason to decline your participation as well. So it's like, well, we could, it's not going to hurt us if we do, but it's not going to help us either if we do. So, there's the crux of it, in terms of whether they should help or not. Gaining access to individuals, once you get in to the institution and you're allowed to, to seek out what participants want, you need to ask which participants or which individuals of this institution is going to best meet the needs of the study. Is it going to, for example, if you're going into a business and you're asking about, you're asking about something, related to your object of study, would it behoove you to maybe focus on people who have been in the institution for years and years, or maybe people who are just entered, or maybe a combination of the both? It really depends, and the researcher has to justify who they're choosing for the study and why. Also, like participant willingness, the thing is that people who enter into a system like that, they might not be trusted. And maybe for good reason. Maybe people think that, the participants might think, well, geez, if I talk to this person and I tell them all the bad things about this institution, I might get fired, which could be the case. So why would they want to talk to you? And once you enter into a field, once you get in, or let's just, say it's the institution that we were talking about, that it's the researcher's job to learn the routines. What are the patterns of the field? Like, what do they do on a daily basis, and how do they do it? Maybe why they do it. You might present yourself as a visitor, maybe only entering the field on a very minimal level, or maybe an initiator. Maybe where you join the field, become part of it, not just on the outside. So it really depends. A lot of this really depends on the question that you're asking, the research question that you're asking, and the type of data that you want to collect. Next is going to be sampling. Now, what I said before about sampling and qualitative research, it's not about it's not about how many people to sample. It's about who and why. Who do you want to sample? Why do you want to sample it? What are they going to offer you? What kinds of things can they offer up to you for the study? So, I guess that's the main part of it. Sampling methods, the a priori determination sampling. Maybe you have some kind of clue based on the literature in your question in terms of what groups you should be studying and collecting data from. Usually cases or individuals have to meet a specific criteria, and that's the prescribed sample in terms of, of whatever. That you're going to be looking for somebody very, very specific in terms of maybe their experience or their demographic, or something else. A complete collection is one specific type of sampling method, and this might be including all participants who meet the criteria for your study within a field. So maybe if it's maybe it could be a mental health clinic or a mental health center in the community. That if you're looking specifically at married men between the ages of 30 to 50, which would be more adult to early midlife years, who are depressed and taking a considerable amount of antidepressants. So anyone who met that criteria would just be, contacted to be part of the study. Theoretical sampling is another type, and this is probably a more common type. That this is about making decisions about sampling, putting together empirical material, such as cases, groups, are made during the process of collecting and interpreting data. So really what you're doing is, in a nutshell, what this is you're determining during the course of the study, in that circular process, as you follow the data, as you collect data, and as you interpret the data, and you find out new things and learn new things about the data, or about the object of study, that will determine who you should be sampling next. So this is like the gold standard of qualitative sampling. So let's say, okay, so hold on. Okay, let's just look at the example of developing a theory for the retirement process. Let's say you wanted to do a qualitative study on people who are preparing to retire. No, let's say people who were already retired. They're like, within 6 months of their retirement date of retiring. And you sit down with, let's say, 5 or 6 people and interview them on what their retirement has been like so far. And out of those 5 or 6 people, you collect a bunch of data in the interviews, but the data, each one of those people are talking about how the retirement has affected their relationships with their spouses. So so the next round of people, or let's say even that you do this a few times with a few groups of 5 people, and after interviewing, And like all of the interviews are basically talking at some point about how it's affecting their relationships with their spouses. That might behoove you or move you to, for the next sample, you might want to sample the spouses of people who have just retired within the last 6 months. So really, it's the results of all of those interviews that are alluding to, yeah, this is affecting my relationships with my spouses. Yeah, go sample the spouses of those of people who have retired and see what they have to say. So you're literally following the data analysis and interpretations, which is really interesting. So that's theoretical sampling. And this is really, or just more of a description. When we get to saturation, this is how we know when we've met the burden of that we've known that we've interviewed and we've collected enough data. So let's say let's say you interview 7 people, and they're all telling you something a little different, but there's a little bit of overlap. But let's say you get to the 8th and the 9th participant, and you're interviewing them, and they're about the object under study, just like you did the first 7 people, and you're really not hearing anything different than the first 7 people out of the 8th person or the 9th person. That means you've met the burden of saturation, which means that there's no new information that's really being found. So that's when you know that it's time to stop interviewing and you don't need to be sampling anyone new, because you've pretty much heard everything there is to hear about that object of study. So here's a comparison between theoretical and statistical sampling. If you wanted to look at that, I think some of the main things here is that sample size is predefined in statistical sampling because you need a certain number of people to give you data in order to complete a statistic. Whereas sample size is not predefined in theoretical sampling because you don't know when saturation is going to be met until it's been met. And that's the one that really stands out to me. And other than the predefined sample versus the sampling is done many times, and criterion is redefined in each step. So things change in qualitative research, whereas in statistical sampling, it's pretty static once it gets going. So, okay, so other types of sampling methods. There's the purposeful sample, and this was just like quantitative research. It's also used in qualitative, and this is sampling people based on a strict set of criteria. When you purposefully sample, you have to think about maybe extreme cases, typical cases, maximal variation, intensity, critical cases, and also convenience. So, and you can read through those at your leisure. The next one is snowball or chain sampling, which is an interesting one I always found, is that typically you are referred participants or future participants by the participants that you're currently working with. So going back to the retirement example, let's say you've found a guy named Joe that retired 2 months ago, and he is you interview him, and he might say, well, yeah, I got a friend who just retired 3 months ago that you might want to call to be part of the study. And that, and so that's how this goes. It's like a chain sampling, people referring people, or things like that. Okay, so let me just move on to designing the study. So the research design for qualitative is really the plan for collecting and analyzing the data that is going to answer the question. The means for achieving the goals, yeah, it's really, this is where the rubber actually meets the road in terms of how are you going to answer the question that's been posed to you. In which design you use is going to depend on a number of factors. One of the big ones is going to be the theoretical approach that you use, whether it's phenomenological or narrative or whatever. that will partially dictate what kind of method design that you, or what kind of design you use. But also the goal of the study, the questions that you're posing, the data and material that you actually need to collect, and also the pragmatic resources that are available. So I'm going to skip through some of this because you can read through those at your leisure. But what I want to do is get to the basic. I want to get to the qualitative designs, and I believe that this is the beginning. Yeah, okay. So the first type of design is going to be the case study. And what a case study is, like you've heard before, is a precise description of a case. Case studies don't have to be just one person. It can be one person, or it can consist of a few people, a group, a family, an organization, institution, can go as high as you want. But it really is, what really makes it a case study is it's that precise description of case. It's a long narrative and very long description of whatever you define as the case. So it's just a very detailed description. Sampling procedure is going to be very purposeful because you're going to be seeking somebody or a group or an institution out very specifically. Methods such as the narrative interviews, ethnographies when collecting data. So through observation and also a lot of discussion. The limitation is generalization, which really generalization is not really taken into consideration for at least generalizing to a lot of people when using case studies. But if you use multiple case studies, then that will build some kind of develop a pattern that might develop into a theory, which is what we're really talking about here with generalization. Comparative studies is the observation of several cases and then looking at and comparing those cases with each other. You don't observe a case as a whole. The question arises concerning the selection of cases to be compared. That you don't want too many, but you don't want too few. Cases have to be somewhat similar and able to compare differences in terms of maybe some demographic similarities. But you don't want them too similar. So you have to find a balance between all of that. Interviewing is going to be the preferable method of comparative studies. Possibly observation, depending on the question. So the thing is also you want to make sure that your study is not too narrow, but also not too broad. So it has to be somewhere in the middle in order to make decent comparisons between the cases. A retrospective design, that's when you look to the past, look for past events and processes as far as what happened. Participants, groups might reflect on events and processes in terms of meaning, and they look back on these things and they reflect and they're like, that's, this is what this experience or this event meant to me. This is what happened. This is how I feel about it now, things like that. Which, this retrospective design goes along very nicely with the phenomenological approach. Also asking, who are you going to select as participants that will provide meaningful data? Well, it depends on the question you're asking and depends on the people that you need. So, also you can use historical sources, documents, artifacts that can be used, to supplement or to substantiate the interview. So, and that can really be anything as long as it's relevant to the question and the object of study or the object under study. There's also the issue for a retrospective design is people forget about is that during, how do I say this? Like if something happened 10 years ago, let's just say 9/11, because that happened about 18 years ago. And you're interviewing people based on their, on if you're interviewing people based on you're interviewing people who were there and for 9/11 and what their experiences were and what those things mean to them now. The thing is that they have 18 years between now and then, which can influence the narrative of what it meant at the time. So I guess what I'm saying is people change, and time and experiences can shift and influence the experiences and the reflections of people's experiences that happened before that. So that's all I'm trying to say. Snapshot design. Snapshots are present tense oriented, giving a view of circumstances, events, processing at the time of the interview. So really this is if it's happening in real time or if it's currently happening. So I don't know, like somebody, like let's say, like I think the Michael Cohen, like right now, Michael Cohen is being interviewed, on Capitol Hill. I think it's happening right now and the news is covering it. So if somebody were doing some kind of a snapshot design of these proceedings, and let's say they wanted to interview just citizens of the United States to get what their view of the circumstances, events, and processes that are unfolding based on these hearings, they would be doing it today. They would be doing it right now as it's unfolding, or they might be, just interviewing them between commercials, or between the first part and the second part. Yeah, just something like that. Something that's happening in real time right now. Okay, so usually interviews and observations are used as methods. Once again, for the snapshot design. Longitudinal designs this is when you're looking at present and future processes and events over a longer period of time. It's not really used too much in qualitative research because this can take a long time to do. Typically, this is, something like this is when somebody will inject themselves into a field and spend maybe years collecting data in that field. There was a book I read a while back about this sociologist who she wrote a whole book about how it was a Hispanic American adolescents' perceptions of their future in terms of as they went through high school. And so she injected herself into a high school in Texas that was right near the border. And she was the known qualitative researcher who was doing the study. The students knew, the teachers knew. And she spent literally years in this town, in this school, collecting data, talking to the students, eating lunch with the students, talking to teachers, going to the football games, and just systematically just collecting data that entire time, in which she was able to write a book over. So that's more of a and not only just interviews, but just also just talking with people and observing them in their natural setting. And that's what resulted in the book. So that's an example of more of a longitudinal qualitative design. So here's actually just like a little chart that I made up that, that these three, the retrospective, the snapshot, and the longitudinal, are more temporally oriented. Whereas retrospective designs look to the past, like lived experiences that are now over. Snapshot is more in real time, what's happening right in this moment. And then longitudinal can be in real time, but also over the course of a long period of time, and, moving into the future. Whereas either one of these, any of these temporal designs can be integrated with a case study design or a comparative design. So you could have a comparative snapshot design, or a longitudinal case study, or a retrospective case study, or a retrospective comparative design, which could help to structure the qualitative study. Okay, well, I know I kind of went through these really quickly. I'm sorry if I didn't go into too much detail. If you have questions about things I didn't go into, please just email me and I'll try to answer your questions. If not, I will catch up with you next week, and have a good day.